Hi, I'm Mike Esposito, President and CEO of Automate Dealership Systems. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about the process or steps that you would go through in changing your DMS. Now, what happens is I think a lot of you get to that Popeye moment, that moment when you say, it's all I can stand because I can't stand no more. You know, you've gotten yet another bill from your DMS, or they're charging you for things that you don't believe you should be charged for, or it's just impossible to work with them. At that point, you really get to, you say, I'm ready to move off of one DMS onto another. You don't do that lightly. This is a heart transplant. And people have really a lot of problems as to the actual change, because we know that people in a dealership don't do well with change. So we're going to go through each of the steps. Okay, so let's take the first step. And this is kind of an interesting thing of just knowing where you stand. Well, obviously the first thing would be contract time frame. I can't tell you how many dealers I've talked to that'll say, well, when are you off your contract? Given you have one. When are you off the contract? And dealers say, I'm not sure, right? Well, you think it's an easy thing to find out. To just find out about when the contract is terminating. Okay, that's the most important thing to start with. So other dealers will say to me, a lot of dealers will say, well, when do I start the process? Well, some of the contracts that are out there have evergreen clauses in them that if you don't notify that DMS provider within a certain period of time before the end of the contract, you're automatically updated on the contract, so you're on for another year or 5 years. So you really want to look at the process as, when should I start? You really are talking about somewhere about anywhere from 7 months to 10 months out from the end of the contract date. So why would you want to start that early? Well, one of the problems are you're not going to just look at one DMS that you're going to switch. You look at multiple DMSs. So that means you're going to go through lots of different demonstrations with them, due diligence with them, each taking a lot of time. On top of that, you want to start that early because a lot of DMSs have the capability to install you, but they get backed up. So there might be a 3 or 4 month backup on their installations, so that if you think about that and you make the decision, it's easily 4 months before you can get installed. So now where are you with the contract? On top of all of that is the data conversion. And in another video, we'll talk a little bit about the data conversion process. But the data conversion is incredibly important because you don't go anywhere without your data. And you need to give that DMS enough time to get and pull all of the data off your current DMS. Okay? The other thing is, when you want to go through is, as you go through this decision process of figuring out, know where you stand, is, well, let's look at your current bill. So in a lot of cases, dealers might look at the bill and see if they can actually reduce their bill by canceling some things on their contract. Maybe you signed up for a CRM and you're not using it anymore. Well, maybe you can get the bill down if that's what's driving you to get off your current DMS. You might be able to get the bill down by going through your bill, but understand exactly what's in your bill. And the other reason you want to do that is because when you start looking at other DMS providers, you want to do apples to apples. So if your current DMS provider on the bill has a CRM, you want to make sure that the providers that you're talking to either have a CRM in their product base, or that you're going to have to go out to a third party and get a CRM. So therefore, again, back to apples. And to be totally honest, if your bill with your current DMS is, say, $5,000 a month and it includes a CRM, and a DMS comes in and says, oh, we'll do it for $2,500 a month, but they don't have a CRM, you need to go out and figure on adding in a CRM to that, and maybe it's $1,500, so now you're at $4,000. So the savings might not be as much. So to be agnostic about this, you really have to look at apples to apples. And then I think knowing where you stand, the most important thing to look at is, how are you going to go about the decision process? Is it going to be consensus or autocratic? Now, I've been doing this for almost 20 years, and I've seen it done both ways, both with kind of interesting implications at the end. The autocratic one is, hey, my name's on the sign. Everybody's going to do what I want them to do. I'm going to go with this DMS, and that's all there is to it. Well, that's fraught with a lot of danger because you get a lot of people getting pushback because people in general, if they don't have a say in things, they tend not to get on board with them. Okay, so it does work and it does help getting the DMS installed, but might not be the best way. Are you going to use a consensus? And a consensus is where you get your cross-functional team, you get all your managers together, you have them look at all of the different DMS products, and they go through it, and then you come up with a consensus. Now, as we've always heard, Abraham Lincoln once said of his cabinet, we want to vote on this thing that's up in front of us, and every one of the cabinet members said nay, and Lincoln said yay, and he said the yays have it. So you obviously have the ultimate decision. However, you do want to understand where your managers are coming from as to the DMS and what it can and can't do for them. You need to also have them come in with questions. This is one of the main things, and I'll talk about it in another section of this, but I can't tell you how many times managers will come in and they don't have any questions. That can't be. If we're going to switch a DMS, as I said, it's a hard transplant, you got to have questions about it. So remember, when you're looking at knowing where you stand, you want to know contract time frame, you want to look at starting the process anywhere between 7 months and a year out. You want to know what's on your current bill. You want to also determine whether this is going to be an autocratic or a consensus process. Step 2 in the process is handling fear of change. Now, as I said earlier, we all know that people in a dealership and people in general really, really have problems with when things change. It's like the old "who moved my cheese." People get so used to doing things the way they're doing, they don't want things to change. So, as I said earlier, changing a DMS is like a heart transplant. It's very, very involved. Okay? And if it's not done correctly, you could kill the patient, which we don't want to have happen. So, how do I overcome fear of change? Well, first of all, is overcome the opposition by engaging your employees. So one of the problems that we have as managers sometimes is that we don't engage with our employees, meaning getting the employees involved in the process. I mean, I'm not just talking about your parts manager, service manager. Maybe you even should be talking to the service writers or the technicians, people who use this current system. Let them know that you're thinking about doing this. Get their input. What do you like about the current system? What do you dislike about the current system? What do you dislike about the current company that we're dealing with? You really want to get them engaged. Doesn't mean that they're going to be making the decision for you. What it means is you're getting input from them and they feel valued because you're asking them for input. Okay, so that's number one, is get them engaged. The other is to implement change in stages. So what does that mean? For instance, a lot of times we come up with a dealer will say, okay, I want to install your system in my dealership and we want everything. Well, but you don't have everything right now. For instance, you don't have dispatch. Yeah, well, we want to install automated dispatch. Well, it's a huge jump from manually dispatching through paper service ROs to automated dispatch. And think about the change. You really want to do it in stages. You want your people to get used to what they're getting right now, and then through not a revolutionary, but an evolutionary process, move the thing along to where you really want to get to, right? So you really want to do this thing in stages if you can. The other thing you want to be able to do is you want to be able to communicate the change effectively. Again, back to engagement of the employees. You want to let them know what's going on. You don't want to all of a sudden pop it on them one day saying, hey, Monday these guys are going to show up and we're going to change our DMS. So communications, to be effective, you really need to do it maybe through email, maybe even walking around talking to everybody. Maybe you have a chat feature on your DMS that you can chat with everybody and let them know what's going on. But the more you can't over communicate it, because a lot of times once you're communicating with the people, you might get back from them information that you need for a great installation. Hey boss, we need to make sure that the system is doing this when they install it, when that didn't come up before. So you really want to communicate change effectively. Step 3 is create your needs list. So the first thing you want to do when you're creating your needs list is look at the critical features and functionality that you need. So how do you do that? Well, you go down and you talk to your managers and you get them to sit down and go through and say, okay, what So we got our bill. Here's everything that we have on our current DMS that we're getting billed for. What are the features and functionalities? Are we using them or are we not using them? Because you'll find a lot of times that you might have a feature or functionality that you're paying for in your current bill that your sales manager 3 sales managers ago signed up for and nobody's using. So do we really need that feature and that functionality or not? So we want to go through that with our managers. The next step is to really look at what you like and dislike from your current DMS provider. And that's just not the software. It's also maybe the way they do business, how they answer the phone. Are they helping us when we call? Those types of things. So you want to get a list of likes and dislikes, not just the features and functions, but really dig into it with your managers as to, okay, so if we switch, what would you really like the system to do that our current system or our current vendor doesn't do? The other thing that you have to think about and needs is, do you want to be up in the cloud in an ASP or on a server? Now, a lot of dealers will say servers. Nobody uses servers anymore. Well, that's not totally true. If you're in a very rural area where you have maybe not so good internet, you really probably should have a server in the store. Versus if you had multiple stores, maybe you want to be in the cloud. Okay, so not all of the DMS providers offer both servers and cloud-based systems. So it's a thing that you want to go through. Obviously, if you have an IT company, if you have an IT person on staff, you want to go through it with him or her and talk about whether we should be up in the cloud or we should be a server. Okay, also, one of the things you need to go through, and this is sometimes left to the 11th hour during the installation, is third-party interfaces. Now, we've heard a lot about all of the fees that have been charged, that type of thing, but over and above that, you really need to get a list of everybody who's pulling data from your current system. First of all, it's a great thing to do, usually on a monthly basis anyway, to make sure that nobody's pulling data that shouldn't be, that you haven't authorized their data pulls. Okay, but go through the list so that your new DMS provider will have that list so they understand. And also, if you're going through the process, that you can ask them, well, do you have integrations and what levels of integrations do you have with these third-party interfaces? So you really want to look at that. And the last thing that you really want to look at is, do you really want one throat to choke? Meaning, do you want to buy everything from one vendor? I want to buy my phones, I want to buy my internet, I want to buy my websites, I want all my maintenance done, and I want my DMS, and I want my CRM, and I want it all from one vendor. Well, if that's what you really need as a dealer or a dealer group, then it really starts to narrow down the amount of vendors that can do that. Okay, so it's one of the things that you have to go through and see on what level are you really want to do one throat to choke, or I'm willing to do all the work and get all the third parties and I only really want a DMS. So as you go down through it, you want to look at the critical features and functionalities, what you like and dislike about your current DMS, whether you want to be in the cloud or on a server, remember and understand all those third-party interfaces you have, and do you really want one throat to choke? So step number 4 is create your vendor list. So literally, what DMSs do you want to talk to? So how do you get that list? Well, first of all, obviously NADA and the OEMs have a list of the DMS vendors that are out there. Very good source of information just to get a list of the names. Also, you might want to talk to your managers. Your managers might have been at other stores that had a different DMS. You can get their recommendation. Should we call in this DMS or that DMS? So a lot of the managers will have it. Also, a lot of dealers are in 20 groups. So if you go to a 20 group, you obviously, I know, talk about DMSs in the 20 group. So maybe you're talking to one of the facilitator or some of the other your peers in the 20 group about who they're on, what have you. There are also blogs out there and forums, automotive websites like Driving Sales. They all can give you information to create your list about who might you want to talk to. Okay, and then last is, do you really need a consultant? Well, there are some excellent consultants out there that not only handle the contracts, and a lot of them do that, they kind of negotiate the contracts, negotiate the DMS, but also really understand the technology and what you need. They'll talk about, well, here's what you have now, here's what your people are talking about, here's who can deliver what you're interested in. So, a consultant, again, they're pretty much agnostic. They'll go off and tell you exactly what you need and what DMSs you should be talking to. So generating the list is fairly easy if you do a little bit of research on it. So you want to talk to NADA and also the OEMs, get your managers involved, talk to the 20 groups, check out the blogs, the websites, and maybe even call in a consultant. Step 5 is to demo the DMS vendors. So the first thing you want to do is you want to tailor the demo to your needs. You don't want the DMS vendor to come in and just present to you. You really want to tailor it to your needs. Okay, so how do you do that? Well, one of the things you need to do is include all stakeholders in it. So make sure every stakeholder has a set of questions. So who might be a stakeholder? For instance, you're a sales manager, your service manager, parts manager, BDC manager. Now, I can't tell you how many, and I said this in one of the earlier steps, how many times I've been through demos and you bring in the service manager and you'll go through the demo and say, do you have any questions? Nope, I have no questions. You don't want to have that happen. What you want to ensure is make sure every person who comes into demo has questions to ask. Go through it with them before they ever come into the demo. So you want specific questions like, tell us how we are going to do this function. Show us how this function works versus what we have currently. Okay, so you want to make sure and check to see that the new system does what you feel the current system doesn't, and to check to see and make sure that it does do it. Okay, so you want to go through that. You also want to determine very quickly the deal breakers. So what's a deal breaker? For instance, you really need to have automated dispatch. That's what you're running currently on your system. It's what your whole service department is built around, is automated dispatch. So if you're going to talk to a DMS, before you even bring them in to demo, you say, well, one of the deal breakers is if you do not have automated dispatch or cannot show us automated dispatch, then it's a deal breaker and we're really not interested in even going through the demo. Okay? So remember, the biggest thing is to make sure all of the stakeholders, all of your managers who are coming into the demonstration have questions written down that they need to have answered that shows how our system works now, show me how the new system will do it, and also to see if there are any deal breakers. Step 6, be real about the pricing and costs. So what does that exactly mean? Well, first of all, you want to understand your current bill. Again, as I said earlier, what you need versus what you want. Okay? Because there are a lot of things on your current bill that you might not need. You're paying for it, you might not need. There might be things that aren't on your current bill that you want. So you really want to go through those and create a spreadsheet that shows all of the things that we need, because we currently have them, and what we want. Okay? Also, you need to, as you're going through your current bill and contract, to check for hidden costs on the contract, because those things add up. For instance, are there click charges for what you print? Are there charges for your financial statements at the end of the year? You really need, what we're trying to get to is an apple-to-apple comparison. And it's not to go off and look at this from a non-agnostic view. We want to look at this agnostically. So what we want to do is we want to say, show exactly what we're currently paying for everything versus what it's going to cost for us to replace that. Okay, so one of the things that we want to talk about then is, say, outside costs, IT costs. So a lot of our DMS partners, if you will, go out there and they talk about that they'll do everything for you, back to that one throat to choke thing. So they might be doing all of your IT maintenance, all of the maintenance of all the networks. Well, a vendor you're talking to might not have that ability. Most of them probably don't. So that means you're going to have to go outside and go get an IT firm to do it. Again, back to apples and apples. We're trying to get apples and apples. Also, you might want to talk about price increases. You know, your current bill wasn't what it was when you signed your contract. So maybe you need to look at, okay, what are we talking about? Price increases. Again, apples to apples. And make sure you just compare those things. I think the biggest thing is, and to be fair to all parties concerned, is to really go through your bill, show what you're paying for now, again, also those hidden costs, and also add on any additional things that might be outside of the bill. And then when you're looking at DMS providers from the standpoint of replacement, if they don't have a CRM, you need to add CRM in as an extra cost because you're going to get a third-party CRM. If they don't have IT maintenance, or if they don't do maintenance printers or what have you, you got to add that in. So you want to make sure that you add in things to the people that you're talking to make sure you're back to apples and apples. So really, understand your current bill, the needs and wants. Make sure look at the hidden costs on the contract, and make sure you're comparing apples to apples. Step 7 is to actually select your vendor. So you've been through all the due diligence, you've been through the demonstrations, you've gotten the pricing, you've gone through and done the apples to apples comparison, and you've go off and you're saying, okay, now what's the last thing I really want to do? Well, when you select the vendor, okay, you might want to definitely start off by getting references from the vendor at this point and talking to other dealers who have that vendor. Now, one of the best questions I've ever been asked is, give me a vendor who, one of your clients who really doesn't really like you, because most of the DMS vendors are going to give you clients who are going to be very good references. Somebody who maybe hasn't had a good experience with you and what's happened. Okay? See if you can find those. So really find out what others are saying about the vendor. Also, you might check external sources. There are sources out there like Driving Sales that rates vendors. NADA had done a survey rating vendors as to their customer satisfaction. There are blogs out there. There are also things that your parts manager might be on, or websites that your service manager might be on that might be talking about the vendors. But I think that really when you're talking about references, you really need to talk to dealers about what happened during the conversion, after the conversion, how do they support it, and also, did they really do what they said they were going to do? Step 8 is, now that you've gone off and decided on the vendor, is to map out the installation. So there's a couple of things you want to do. Obviously, first of all, the vendor should have what we call a playbook as to how the installation is going to occur. Okay, so you're going to go sit down with them and make sure that everything is going according to the plan or the playbook. So one of the things you want to do is avoid gaps in your DMS coverage. What does that mean? Well, you really don't want to say, okay, we're coming off of this DMS at the end of April, so therefore the last week in April is when we want to install. You really don't want to do that. You really need to be running the systems concurrently. By what I mean concurrently is not that you're double entering data in, but you really want to go off and make sure that the existing system is up and running. So if there's any data that the new system needs to pull over and above the data they've already pulled, they can. So you really want to avoid the gaps in the coverage. You want to audit and review everything during the installation. You want to talk about, and we'll talk about data conversion in another video segment, but you want to audit and review everything. You want to look at, obviously, any agreements. You want to look at any of the data, how they're going to be pulling the data, those types of things. Okay. So the biggest thing, though, is to avoid the gaps in the coverage of your DMS. Step 9 is planning the installation and training. Now, you would think this would be easy, but it can get very involved. Okay. So the first thing you want to do is, with whoever is the project manager for the installation on the DMS side, is to get together with them as to what week or weeks you're going to install the system. So you're going to come up with a date. Now, this is going to sound a little bit ridiculous, but one of the things you want to make sure happens is that when you've agreed to an install date, that all of your managers understand they can't be taking vacations that week. Okay, and you might say, well, who would do that? I got to tell you, we've walked into a lot of installations where 2 days into the installation, the office manager said, oh, I'll be out for the next 2 days because I have a little bit of a vacation I'm taking. Now, who does that? Well, it does happen. You want to make sure that it's all hands on deck for that week, because you can't get back those installation days. Okay? And what you also want to do is you want to discuss the pre-install and installation process with that project manager. Most DMS providers will have some sort of pre-installation training, so that maybe a couple of weeks before the go live week or weeks, that you're up on maybe their learning management system, going through videos and documentation on the system so that you can have an idea of what's going to happen when the trainers walk in. And then also you want to discuss the install process. Who's doing what to whom and when, so that you know that people have to be there, that type of thing. So remember, when you plan your training, you want to make sure you got an install week, that everybody's going to be there, and you want to also discuss the pre-install and the installation process. So step 10, and final step, is to evaluate or tweak your new system. So what does exactly that mean? Well, as you go along, and maybe you're a month or two into the system, you want to kind of keep a log and have your managers keep a log of, can the system do this, or how does the system do this? Because even though you did all those great questions during the demo and you decided based on the questions, yep, the system is right for us, once you really get down deep into any system, things are different from one system to the other. So you really want to know, well, how do I do this or how do I do that? On top of that, there might be things as you get deep enough in that the old system did that the new system can't do, and what might be the workarounds on those. So you really want to make sure you're following that. And also, you want to definitely establish a follow-up training program. Well, you say, well, Mike, we were trained the week that they came in or 2 weeks they come in. Yeah, but what happens is, we all know there's turnover in dealerships. It's when you get a new person on, how does that person get trained? Well, if you train them the way people typically do it this day, it's, Jane, we just hired her as a service writer, and Joe, one of our service writers, is going to train her. Except that Joe was trained by Jim, who was trained by Bob, who was trained by Joe, and it's like that old telephone game. You don't really understand how the person's going to be trained. So you really want to make sure that the DMS vendor has a follow-on training program that allows new people coming on board to be trained in a cost-efficient manner. So evaluate the new system. As you go along, keep in a list of things can't do, how do we do this, workarounds, and then establish a follow-up training program. The decision to change DMS providers should not be taken lightly. In order for a successful transition, it's important that you plan ahead as much as possible and are prepared. You can gain more insight on this topic by downloading one of our ebooks at www.automate.com.